In today's video, we explore two killers separated by geography and culture, but united by something far more unsettling. One wore a police uniform and claimed he was cleansing his city of immorality. The other believed he could transform himself into a real-life horror icon, chasing infamy through random slaughter. From the frozen forests of Siberia to the bustling streets of London, these are cases where ideology, delusion and ego fused with violence, and where the line between fantasy and reality collapsed with deadly consequences. Alright, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't subscribed, do so now, as we'll be dropping 1 or 2 videos per week. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below around the cases we cover, or cases you would like to hear. So with that said, I'm not going to keep talking, let's get into the video. In Angarsk, Siberia, snow settles softly against the roadside. The streets are quiet, the air sharp with winter chill. Through the fog, a police car slows beside a woman walking home. The officer inside looks ordinary. His uniform is neat. His voice is calm as he offers the woman a lift home. It's late and cold, and without a second thought, the woman gets inside. By morning, she will be reported missing, and over the next 2 decades, dozens of more women will vanish into forests, riverbanks, and frozen clearings across Siberia. Some had been drinking, others simply walking home, but all trusted the wrong man. This is the story of Mikhail Popkov, the werewolf, a police officer who hunted his own city for almost 20 years. Between 1992 and 2011, Mikhail Popkov essayed and murdered at least 83 women and girls in the vast Russian region of Siberia. He is referred to by the media as the Angarsk Maniac and the werewolf. He remains the most prolific individual serial killer in Russian history. Popkov was born in 1964 in the Krasnoyarsk region of Siberia, then part of the USSR. Much of his childhood remains unclear, but investigators and psychiatrists later unearthed claims of instability in the home. Some accounts suggest his mother struggled with alcoholism, and Popkov himself would later express deep resentment toward women he perceived as immoral, particularly those who drank alcohol. Whether rooted in trauma, projection or self-justification, this fixation would define the sinister nature of his crimes. He claimed he was acting according to his own moral code, describing his murders as a form of cleansing. In interviews and court statements, Popkov portrayed himself not as a predator, but as a man restoring order, targeting women he believed were corrupting society through alcohol, promiscuity, and what he defined as immoral behaviour. In his own warped world, he was not committing crimes, he was correcting them. By casting himself as a moral enforcer, Popkov created a narrative that shielded him from the reality of what he was doing. He did not see the women as individuals with families, histories and futures. He reduced them to categories of behaviour, offenders in his private court. That reframing allowed him to distance himself from the brutality of his actions, to interpret violence as correction rather than cruelty. Some investigators later suggested that his hostility towards intoxicated women may have been rooted in unresolved anger towards his mother. Whether this was displaced resentment, some deeply ingrained misogyny, or simply a justification constructed after his arrest, the pattern is clear. He targeted women who fit a profile he had already judged and condemned. By all accounts, Popkov was not erratic in execution. He was calculated, organised and patient. He maintained steady employment as a police officer, married and had a daughter, and cultivated the image of an ordinary, hard-working man. His uniform gave him a sense of authority and trust, and his role in law enforcement provided insight into investigative procedures. He was not unravelling within the darkness that had taken hold of his mind. He was operating with structure, discipline, and chilling intent. It should be noted here that Popkov's predatory gaze was not just confined to women who were visibly intoxicated. Over time, his definition of immorality expanded to suit his own deviant impulses. Women socialising late at night, walking alone, or simply existing without male company could fall within his self-appointed criteria. Some reports suggest that several victims physically resemble his mother, a detail that fueled speculation that his violence may have been rooted in something deeply personal and unresolved. Popkov often approached women in full uniform, sometimes driving a patrol vehicle, presenting himself as a figure of protection rather than threat. In a region where law enforcement symbolised order in an otherwise harsh and unpredictable environment, that uniform likely downed the women's defences instantly, even when rumours of a serial killer were rampant. It also makes me wonder whether the power of the badge did more than just grant him access, whether it reinforced his internal narrative that he was entitled to judge, detain, and ultimately murder those he saw fit. Once a victim entered his vehicle, the illusion of safety evaporated quickly. He drove them to isolated forests, frozen riverbanks, and abandoned industrial areas scattered across Siberia's vast terrain. Landscapes that could swallow evidence and silence any screams. There, the violence unfolded in a brutal onslaught. Women were beaten, essayed, tortured, and killed. The weapons varied: axes, knives, screwdrivers, metal rods, even tools like shovels were used, suggesting not ritual in the traditional sense, but opportunism guided by intent. The brutality, however, was consistent. Many victims suffered catastrophic blunt force injuries. His hatred for his victims manifested itself in degrees of mutilation that earned him the nickname the Werewolf. He was also known as the Wednesday Murderer, as many of his victims were found on this day of the week. For years, fear gripped Angarsk. Women avoided walking alone at night. Towns and villages became more vigilant and determined to catch the killer. And yet, the investigation stalled repeatedly. Survivors described their attacker as a police officer, but this possibility was slow to be fully embraced. Track marks consistent with police vehicles were found near crime scenes, but confronting the idea that the killer was one of their own required a shift investigators were not willing to make. However, in 2012, a breakthrough came through a large-scale DNA screening. More than 3,500 current and former police officers were required to submit samples. Popkov, who by then had left the police force and was working as a private security guard, was matched to biological evidence collected from crime scenes. He was arrested that same year. During interrogation, he confessed, calmly and in detail. Initially convicted in 2015 of 22 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment, he later admitted to dozens of more murders. Subsequent trials added over 50 additional convictions. In court, he appeared composed, at times almost detached, describing his actions as if recounting routine procedures. One survivor, identified in Russian media as Svetlana, had been left for dead after a brutal attack in the freezing Siberian wilderness. She later identified Popkov as her assailant. At one stage in the investigation, Popkov's wife, herself a police officer, reportedly provided him with an alibi that delayed suspicion. She and their daughter have since publicly stated they never suspected his double life, which is a claim we hear all too often in serial murder, a family man who no one would suspect. In a grim and chilling detail, Popkov claimed his killing ceased only after he contracted syphilis during an act of necrophilia, stating that his illness diminished his sex drive and with it his urge to kill. Even after sentencing, he reportedly accompanied investigators on excursions to remote areas, calmly pointing out burial sites, lakes and forest clearings where additional bodies might be found. The scale of his crimes forced a public reckoning in Russia. Many of his victims were buried in closed coffins due to the extent of the injuries inflicted. The nickname werewolf lingered, a predator hiding in plain sight, shielded by his uniform and good reputation. Psychiatrists and criminologists continue to debate Popkov's motivations. Some suggest his violence reflected displaced rage towards his mother. Others argue that ideology was a post hoc rationalization, a moral script layered over his sadism. Whatever the psychological roots, the pattern is unmistakable. A mission-oriented serial killer who believed himself justified. Beneath the language of purification was something far older and darker. Control, domination, and the conviction that he alone had the right to decide who lived or died. And perhaps the most unsettling element is this: by most outward appearances, Popkov was ordinary, a husband, a father, a colleague, a man who shared fishing trips and neighbourhood conversations. His case forces an uncomfortable reflection. Not all predators lurk at the margins of society. Some stand inside its institutions. Some investigate crimes while committing them. Some shake hands at work and tuck their children into bed at night. For 2 decades, he enforced law by day and hunted by dark. And that may be the most chilling truth of all. We never really know who is hiding behind the mask of normalcy. It's just before dawn in North London. The streets of Tottenham are mostly quiet, except for a young man who walks alone, carrying a knife concealed beneath his jacket. In his mind, horror films blur with reality. Violence feels cinematic and performative. And by the end of that morning, 4 strangers will be stabbed, 3 of them killed. An elderly couple in their own home, a man walking alone. Victims chosen not for who they were, but completely at random. And when the man is caught, his explanation sounds absurd and unbelievable. This is the case of Daniel Gonzalez, the man the media would label the Freddy Krueger Killer. Between the 15th and 17th of September 2004, Daniel Gonzalez carried out a short but brutal killing spree across southern England. In the space of just 3 days, he attacked multiple strangers in London, Sussex and Hampshire, killing 4 people and seriously injuring others. The randomness, speed and theatricality of the attack shocked investigators, but it was Gonzalez's stated motivation that made the case especially disturbing. He claimed he wanted to emulate fictional horror villains, particularly Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. Gonzalez spoke openly about his desire to become infamous, to be remembered as a killer whose names would live on alongside those of cinematic monsters and run parallel with Ted Bundy. Unlike many serial killers driven by ideology or fixation, his mission was incoherent, less about who he killed and more about the act itself and the notoriety it might bring. Daniel Gonzalez was born in 1980 in Woking, Surrey, to an English mother and a Spanish father. By early accounts, his childhood did not immediately suggest the violence to come. He was an only child. His parents separated when he was 6 and he remained living with his mother, though he continued to have frequent contact with his father through childhood and into adulthood. In 1991, he attended Gordon School in Woking, a grant-maintained boarding school where his mother worked. Early on, teachers were concerned about his attainment. He was assessed by an educational psychologist and was found to have dysgraphia, a learning difficulty affecting writing, but further assessments indicated he had an above-average IQ. He excelled at chess and showed promise as a stage actor, but beneath the promising surface, cracks were already showing. In 1995, shortly before his GCSE exams, he was expelled for bad behaviour, though he was allowed back to sit the exams. That same year he began using cannabis, and after leaving school his mental health deteriorated rapidly. He experienced dark moods, intrusive thoughts, and periods of emotional withdrawal that eventually brought him to the attention of police and mental health professionals. Clinicians warned that his continued drug use risked tipping into psychosis. He was using powerful hallucinogens, large doses of LSD, and sometimes ketamine. Despite these clinical interventions, his condition worsened. He drifted out of structured life, abandoning work and social stability. By his early 20s, he was unemployed, isolated, and living a chaotic routine dominated by alcohol, drugs, violent video games, and slasher movies. Here, fantasy and reality blurred. In his mind, violence became entertainment, and then aspiration. In the days leading up to the murders, the warning signs became more apparent. His mother, Leslie Savage, described finding their kitchen strewn with knives and heard that he'd been seen running naked through the estate where they lived. That was enough to frighten her into contacting mental health services, believing this was finally the crisis that would force action. She later said she was effectively told to assess the danger herself and contact the psychiatric hospital if she felt unsafe. Another handoff, another delay right at the edge of what was coming. On September 15, 2004, Gonzalez made his first known attempt at murder. In Hilsea, Hampshire, he approached 61-year-old Peter King while the elderly man was walking his dog. He calmly said to the man he intended to kill him, and then attacked with a knife. King fought back and survived, but the encounter marked the beginning of Gonzalez's spree. Later that same day, he travelled to Hove in East Sussex. There he donned a hockey mask, seemingly inspired by another fictional killer, and stabbed 76-year-old Marie Harding to death in her home. Afterward, he returned home as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, on September 17th, the violence escalated dramatically. Gonzalez travelled to London. At approximately 5:30 a.m, he attacked 46-year-old Kevin Malloy in Tottenham, stabbing him repeatedly in the head, neck and chest. Malloy died at the scene. Shortly afterward, Gonzalez attempted another home invasion, stabbing Kumis Constantino, who fought back and survived. By 8 a.m, Gonzalez reached Highgate. After unsuccessfully trying several doors, he entered the home of retired couple Derek and Jean Robinson. Both were stabbed to death in their own home. Gonzalez made no attempt to conceal himself. He fled the scene naked and covered in blood and was arrested shortly afterward at Tottenham Court Road Underground Station. The arrest marked the end of his spree, but the violence did not end here. While awaiting trial, Gonzalez was held at Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. There, he attempted suicide by biting through an artery in his arm and became so volatile that officers were required to wear protective body armour when handling him. At trial, his defence team argued diminished responsibility, citing severe mental illness and disassociation. The prosecution countered that Gonzalez was not psychotic in the legal sense, but a psychopath who had lowered his inhibitions through alcohol and drugs and knowingly chose to kill. They also argued that he exaggerated claims of hearing voices in an attempt to evade full responsibility. The jury agreed with the prosecution, and Gonzalez was convicted of murder and sentenced to 6 life terms, with a recommendation that he never be released. The case reignited debate about the gap between mental health care and criminal justice. Gonzalez's mother later spoke publicly about her repeated attempts to secure help for her son. She claimed that she'd been told repeatedly that intervention would only come after a crisis. "Does my son have to commit a murder to get help?" she had asked, a question that would later haunt the case and be answered in the most grisly way. Daniel Gonzalez would later go on to take his own life in prison on August 9, 2007, cutting an artery with a broken edge of a CD case. His crimes sit uncomfortably at the crossroads of fantasy, untreated mental illness, and deviance. The horror movies did not make him a killer, but they gave his violence a script, a costume to wear, a name. The unsettling truth is not that he admired fictional monsters. It's that long before the murders, warning signs were visible and ignored. By the time the system intervened, the crisis had already arrived, and for 4 families, it came far too late.